Penn State football fans, we are back. I'm Bob Flounders, joined by the one and only Johnny McGonigal. It's time for another podcast, the Blue White Breakdown podcast, PennLive's Penn State football podcast. Johnny, it's just always busy. It's crazy busy. It doesn't matter. The later we get into summer, there's always something going on with James Franklin's football program. Definitely a couple of things to touch base with, touch on. Excuse me, Johnny, but I'm excited about getting closer to June. But also, I think anytime Penn State gets a quarterback to commit, I think the antenna really go off for the fan base. They want to know just what we're getting or what they are getting, excuse me, maybe in the future for the Penn State quarterback position. I want to make sure I pronounce this young gentleman's name right. There's an E in there in the middle that might throw me off. I don't know if it's silent or not. Ethan Grunkemeyer. Do I have that right, from Ohio?
I think so. Yeah, that's how I've been saying it. So I'm scheduled here. We're recording this on Tuesday morning. I'm scheduled to talk to Ethan's high school coach later this afternoon. So maybe I'll be corrected in a couple of hours. But I think Grunkemeyer is the correct pronunciation.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe not necessarily out of the blue, but he was up there over the weekend. Saw some video of him. They list him at, he's a nice sized quarterback, but he even looks a little bit bigger than they list him at, about 6'3", 205 from Ohio. And I guess, Johnny, Penn State is really good at identifying prospects fairly early on. And the fan base will see that the kid is listed as a 3-star, but after getting an invite to the Elite 11s, I mean, he's going to be a 4-star kid at the very least by the time he is done. What else have you learned about Ethan? He looks like he's one of the bigger quarterbacks I think Penn State's had on the roster.
Yeah, he's 6'2", 190 pounds, and obviously he's going to grow into that body a bit more when he eventually signs, gets on campus, goes through all those winter workouts and everything like that. An Ohio kid from Olentangy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, let me know, listeners. But and Penn State has had some recent success recruiting quarterbacks out of Ohio, just like a Drew Aller. So we'll see.
Don't forget about Sean Clifford.
And Sean Clifford. No, Drew and Ethan actually share a quarterbacks coach out there, and so there's a lot of familiarity between Drew and Ethan. Between obviously Ethan and Penn State, he's visited a boatload of times. He visited in 2021, visited a couple of times last year. He was on campus, I believe, to receive his offer in April. And then visited back-to-back weekends the past 2 weekends. And committed to Penn State on Saturday, and then went to State High for the Elite 11 regionals and performed really well. And like you mentioned, Bob got that invitation to the Elite 11 finals out in Los Angeles. And so he'll be there competing with the best quarterbacks in his quarterback class and in his recruiting class. And it seems like it's another one where Penn State gets the kid committed in as a 3-star, and then it's like he's a riser in the class, and and I wouldn't be surprised if more schools come in on him to offer. I think it was 23 or 24 offers that he had. Michigan State, Minnesota, Virginia all hosted him, but I wouldn't be surprised if some heavy hitters try to come in and flip him later in the process. But it seems like a really good situation for both him and Penn State.
Yeah, and as you look now at Penn State's 2024 class, Johnny, pretty diverse class in terms of the position groups. I believe they're at 14 as we record this. Depending on which service you follow, I think everyone would agree it's a top 10 class in some way, shape, or form. They've done very well in Pennsylvania. They've addressed the quarterback position. 14 is a nice number to have. Going into late May. We talked about the Wisconsin influence at Penn State, the burgeoning Wisconsin influence, but I just think that not that they were short at quarterback by any means, but they have 3 scholarship guys on the roster with Drew Aller, Bo Prabula, Jackson Smolik, who are the freshman who enrolled in January. So James Franklin has always kind of got his eye on the quarterback position. You can never have enough, especially in the age of the transfer portal, right? So when you look, Johnny, just real quick, when you look at the 2024 class, the way it stands, and it's fluid, right? There's no guarantee they're all going to end up coming to Penn State. What stands out to you the most with the addition of the quarterback?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, this was kind of, it's not the last piece because you've got probably 10 more slots to fill, and we're sitting here at the end of May. But quarterback was a big slot to fill. It always is. You always want to be meticulous about the quarterback that you bring into the class. You know, they were interested in other quarterbacks and maybe still interested in bringing in a second quarterback, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't really expect that. When you already have three young quarterbacks on the roster in Allard, Prabula, and Smolik, it feels like it should be a one quarterback class, but who knows? They might try to bring in a second. But to get Ethan in and to get that locked in May, assuming he doesn't flip, or go elsewhere, I think it's a big step because they had already kind of laid the foundations in this class. Quentin Martin, the 5-star, 4-star running back from out in the Pittsburgh area, Bell Vernon. I mean, the top player in Pennsylvania. And then you look at even Anthony Specca and again, you mentioned them being able to recruit Pennsylvania really well. Caleb Brewer, Kenny Wosley, Cooper Cousins. So you really like what they've been able to do in PA. They get their quarterback. They've got 3 of the top players from Wisconsin, a couple of really talented corners from Florida. They've got a really good base right now, and that's going into a June, month of June that they're going to be hosting a lot of prospects, and not just 2024 guys, and they'll have 2025 players on campus as well, but. I think they're in a really good spot. And I wouldn't be surprised next if you're looking at positions. They don't have a wide receiver in this class yet. So wouldn't be surprised if they get 1 or 2 of those in, especially with new wide receivers coach Marcus Hagans,
Right.
Doing a lot of grunt work. See if maybe those connections down at the Virginia Beach area will pay off. Wouldn't be surprised either to see them bring in yet another corner, because if you look at their corner room, Kalen King is going to go to the NFL as long as he plays up to his standards this season. Johnny Dixon, the same deal. And then you're looking at Cam Miller, and Daquan Hardy is an upperclassman as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a heavy corner class, and they already have a couple, but they could add a couple more.
Yeah, and so the Elite 11 finals this year, which Ethan Grunkemeyer now has an invitation to, out in Los Angeles, June 14th to June 16th, and I just bring that up. I know you mentioned it, but there'll be more eyes on this kid, and a strong showing there. Penn State might have to fight off some other programs to keep him, but that is part of the deal, right? If you're going to be in it for good kids, and good kids want to come to Penn State, the more he has a chance to improve, the more he has a chance to impress. I mean, I'm sure other schools are not going to stop recruiting him, but a strong showing at the Elite 11, and I'm sure Penn State might have kind of its hands full, maybe just trying to keep other schools from showing more and more interest, but it's probably a good problem to have. Johnny, you mentioned the cornerback position, and it's a strength, right? Even without Joey Porter, but it can go from a position of like where you feel very secure to, hey, it's going to turn around in a hurry, especially when an underclassman like Kalen King develops at his rate and leaves school early, which is probably. There is no such thing as a sure thing, but boy, it's hard to imagine him coming back after this season if he has anything close to the year that he had last year. And he's the kind of kid that's only going to get better. So they're going to probably have to move on from him. Johnny Dixon, Daquan Hardy, you mentioned him, one of the better, I think, nickel slot corners in the Big Ten. So it's always a position of concern. And I bring that up because Penn State's kind of updated its summer roster to include recent transfer portal additions, a not so recent transfer portal addition that we've been talking about probably since January, a wide receiver, but also the remainder of the 2023 class that did not enroll early at Penn State. Penn State, I think they're all up there. Just kind of looking at the heights and weights of some of these guys to see if they match up. They all look. I don't know if those weights how accurate they are, but they all look about what we expected them to be. Johnny, when you look at the new Lions on the roster, I mean, we could talk about Dante Cephas, but is there another name or two that really interests you? I know that they can't practice until August, but they can start to work out and get to know their teammates, get to know the strength staff. Any couple players on this list that kind of interest you?
In terms of the transfers that came in,
Yeah.
there's 4 of them that, like you mentioned, Dante Cephas was verbally committed in January, had to finish out his academics in Kent State in the spring. Some of these other guys, committed. I mean, Davian Collins, a corner from Mississippi State, young kid, 4 years of eligibility. He just committed to Penn State last week, and so it varies with these guys. But the guy that really kind of intrigues me in terms of immediate impact, because I think Davian Collins is one for the future.
Yeah.
Alonzo Ford, the D tackle for Old Dominion, because of the depth concerns at defensive tackle, could work his way into that rotation, but I don't expect him to be an immediate starter. The one that really intrigues me is Trey Potts, the running back from Minnesota, who had over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons for Minnesota in 2021. Kind of took over as their lead back when Mo Ibrahim went out with an injury. Williamsport kid comes in, provides at the very least a veteran presence and veteran cover for that running back room that features Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, but also behind them. Otherwise, it was a handful of walk-ons and then 2 2023 signees in London Montgomery and Cameron Wallace. Wallace was a late add in the cycle, and then Montgomery missed his senior season with a serious leg injury. And so you didn't want to have to rely on either of those guys to be the third back to even contribute whenever, if ever, Katron and Nick need a spell. But now you have Trey Potts, who not only is a local kid, but is talented too. And as long as he stays healthy, that's what you like to see. And so, God forbid something happens to Singleton or Allen, you've got a talented guy who has stepped in for a star back before and performed well. So I really think that's an underrated addition this offseason, a necessary addition given the depth situation at running back.
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there with him, because it's one of those like don't break the glass until you need them kind of players. And he's if that going into August, if somebody like that is your number 3 running back just at the start of camp, that's a pretty good feeling. Like, as you said, he has a pretty proven resume of when given an opportunity. And I'm not talking about 3 or 4 carries a game. One of those running backs, if you give him 10 or 15 carries a game, he has shown in Big Ten play that he can produce. So I think that is one that's really going to make James Franklin and Mike Yursich and Jaywan Sider feel good about. I do think the one thing I'm just going to be curious about is, and I referenced it, Johnny, is these player weights. I mean, you just never know how quickly these guys, maybe, especially at Penn State, where they have the nutrition bar, they have a really good strength and conditioning staff, how much bigger and stronger they can get in a short time. And I only bring that up because I'm always going to go back to Tony Rojas after his January to remember and his February to remember, where he put on about 30 pounds. And I saw him during the blue-white game, and I was like, this guy looks like he's ready to go right now, like as in right now, maybe, on the field a lot now. But Ford, the defensive tackle from Old Dominion, they do have some bodies they like. They are not particularly large inside. There's no one really built like PJ Mustipher, but I'm just curious. They list him at 280 now. I wonder if maybe by the middle of August, if he could even get up to 290. I just think to play in the Big Ten, if you're going to play at 280, James Franklin has the famous Aaron Donald comments for a reason, although Aaron Donald might be a little bit bigger than that. But I just think that I'm sure he's a good player, but I would imagine Penn State's going to try and put some weight on him, and I think they would feel better if he could get just a little bit larger because they're going to need those defensive tackles in a couple of these games, Johnny. And we all know what games we're talking about, but I'm sure they wouldn't take him if they didn't like him, and maybe they're going to like him for more than 1 year. But I'll be curious to see if you don't usually see a Penn State tackle other than Hakeem Beamon at 280 pounds. So that's one I'll be watching for. And I wanted to say before we get to some other news about Penn State's schedule, Johnny, we got to talk a little bit about Dante Cephas. You've been writing about him all off season. I know you had an updated piece on him recently on PennLive, so the Penn State fans can check that out. But we talked about, hey, let's see. It's until he actually gets on campus, it's hard to really talk too much about him. Hey, he's here, so it's real now. He is a dangerous player in space, and I would imagine as much as they feel good about Trey Potts joining the running back room, Johnny, they probably feel even a little bit better about Dante Cephas potentially being a starting wideout in Penn State's 3-receiver set.
Absolutely. No, Dante's a kid we've talked about, like you mentioned, for a while now. He verbally committed back in January, the same day Taylor Stubblefield was let go.
Yep.
And so it's been that long. But now that he's finally on campus, Penn State's getting a guy that Georgia, Oklahoma wanted out of the transfer portal. When he made his decision to commit to Penn State, The Athletic had him as the number 3 player available in the portal. And when you have 130 catches and 1,900 yards in 2 seasons, even at the MAC level, that's going to draw a lot of attention to yourself in the best way possible. And so you look at what Penn State did this spring camp without him while he was finishing up his academics. Keandre Lambert-Smith and Harrison Wallace III emerging as wide receivers, separating themselves from the pack. James Franklin mentioned that a couple of times throughout the spring, but he kept challenging that wide receiver room. He kept saying the competition isn't there. They need to step up. They need to feel like they have 5 or 6 guys that they're confident in, and they're not there yet. Well, Dante Cephas, adding him to the equation gives you a number immediately, and honestly, a guy that could be your number 1 wide receiver. Looking at the production the last 2 years, looking at his tape, how he just kind of fits in, and the emphasis that they put on getting him, because they were after a handful of wide receivers in the portal: Caden Prather, Dante Thornton. Those guys that Penn State didn't get those 2 guys that they wanted, but they really wanted Dante Cephas, and they got him. And I would be surprised if he didn't play a really big role for them this upcoming fall, and even next year too, because that's the other thing that we're talking about. Obviously with so much kind of hype and focus around the 2023 season, and that's what we're barreling towards here, Bob. There's so much focus on that, but Dante Cephas has 2 years of eligibility. Alonzo Ford has 2 years of eligibility. Trey Potts 2 years of eligibility. So, and I mentioned earlier, Davian Collins 4. So these are guys that are going to help them obviously in 2023, but also as long as they're around, if they didn't play well, too well and go to the NFL, they'll be around to help in 2024 as well.
Yep. And so with Cephas in the fold at wide receiver, you look at the room, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Trey Wallace, Harrison Wallace III. They were 1-2 coming out of spring. I think Amari Evans, who's a second-year wideout, his play in the blue-white game, and James Franklin said afterward, it wasn't just for the game. It was for probably the last week and a half of spring. I think he really kind of made some strides. So he felt better, I think, at the end of spring. And now with a healthy Dante Cephas there, that's certainly a much more dangerous receiver room than it was maybe in January, right? You're still smarting from the loss of Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley. You don't know who you're going to get, if anyone, in the transfer portal. You get Cephas to kind of say he's going to come for late, early summer, get on the practice field, and then you have, I think, at least one receiver, a young receiver, step up in spring, and then you get Trey Potts. The offense has certainly become, I think, more formidable late in the off season. So we'll see how they look We'll see how they look in August. But yeah, very good signs for Penn State, Johnny. We're talking about Penn State, all the news that's happened almost since after spring practice. It's so funny here on the Blue White Breakdown. But Johnny, I guess I'll just throw it to you this way. About a week ago, I don't know. I don't know how about you, but I didn't really have any plans to be traveling on Thanksgiving Day, and it looks like that just kind of went out the window. Penn State's schedule for 2023 took another interesting twist with the report from Pete Thamel that the season-ending game at Michigan State is going to be on a Friday. It's going to be on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Penn State's played a couple of games that aren't on Saturdays in recent years. They opened last year on a Thursday night at Purdue. In 2018, they played a Friday night game, I believe, at Illinois, Trace McSorley's final year. But they're almost always going to play on Saturday. Penn State fans have kind of grown accustomed to making their travel plans around a trip to State College, or booking flights for like one or two trips on the road. But at least they get to know early, right? Or relatively early. It looks like Penn State, Michigan State's going to be on Friday. That's not really the question, Johnny. The question is, what time on Friday is this game going to be played?
Oh, Bob, I was not expecting a Sunday night news dump, but thank you to Pete Thamel for that, realizing he had to write something then. But yeah, I also wasn't expecting, like you mentioned, to be in Detroit for Thanksgiving. So we're just going to have to go to the Lions-Packers game, Bob, because if we're going to be in Detroit for Thanksgiving, we might as well go to Ford Field and go to the game. No, I mean, this is one of those where we'll kind of see where they end up playing. I'm pretty sure Iowa and Nebraska normally play at 3:30 on Black Friday. I think that's the case.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before. You mentioned that did the Big Ten waive that November night game thing? Because if that's the case, then maybe this is a night game.
I saw a story for one of our sister sites, Cleveland.com, was talking about Ohio State's schedule. And I believe one of their games in November is going to be at night. I think it has something to do with the new broadcast partners. Don't quote me on this, but there's a lot more leeway and a lot more fluidity to maybe potential night games, I think in November. So something just to look out for, because if they want the game, if one of the new TV networks wants this game on Black Friday, they don't want it to go up against Iowa. I would think they do not want it to go up against the Iowa-Nebraska game, assuming that is still going to be on Black Friday. Traditionally, it has been. So if that game is on Friday and Penn State's going to play on Friday, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have them, start, unless they're going to move one of the games to noon, which, I would be great with, and I'm sure you would be great with. But yeah, I do think there is a possibility that this game could potentially be at night. I'm not 100% on this, but I did read that I believe Ohio State's got a November night game now, and I think it's a result of maybe the new TV deal.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't mind a noon game. I wouldn't mind a noon game at all. Noon games are great. No deadline concerns, no nothing. But yeah, so Penn State fans, make your travel arrangements accordingly. It's tough though. It's tough for fans to want to go to that game now because you have Thanksgiving, and especially if it's
plan on having Thanksgiving out there now. It's not like you're gonna have a big feast in the State College area on Thursday and then want to pile into a car and drive with 7 pounds of turkey, coating your insides, and then drive to Detroit. So yeah, I think if you want to go to the game, the logical thing to do would be to plan on maybe having a little Thanksgiving in the greater Detroit area. And to your point, if it's the Lions Packers, I think we both know one person on the Penn State beat that's probably going to go to that game. I don't see any reason. I think Audrey Snyder's in for that game, and Rich Scarcella, I believe, is another huge Packers fan. So maybe that's suddenly on their radar.
Yeah, no, I've been talking to Audrey about possibly going. I'm looking at flights. I was looking at flights last night out of Philly, There's like 6:30 in the morning flight. Like, you know what? Because it's the game is at 12:30, I think, on Thanksgiving Day. So I'm gonna have to get there early. But we'll see. We'll make the most of it, right, Bob? It's one of those. No one likes to miss Thanksgiving, but at the same time, we get another Saturday off now.
That is correct. And you know what? I honestly, I'm dead serious when I say this. I mean, in the NFL, anything can happen. So Sean Clifford might be the quarterback of the Packers in that game. I mean, Jordan Love there's nothing promised to Jordan Love. You know, he's got to stay healthy. I don't know if they're going to add to that roster, but they took him in the 5th round. And to me, that means he's got a great shot to maybe open the year as the backup. Anything happens to Jordan, you know, Audrey and Rich and maybe Johnny McGonigal could be at that game, and under center will be none other than Sean Clifford.
Yeah. And I'll let you write that one then, Bob. I'm at the game. You can go ahead and write that story.
Maybe we'll just write the advanced portion of that with quotes from James about, and then we'll just let somebody else. Dave, think we can draft Dave Jones to do? I don't know. We'll see. That might be a little bit too much. But yeah, it's just it made Thanksgiving even more interesting. There's pros and cons to it. I think the Penn State fan base is probably still wrapping their heads around that. But we'll see when that game is. They're going to have to come up with that start time pretty soon, I would think. They can't wait. They're not going to wait until October to announce that start time, because there are a lot of Penn State fans that have to, you know, make some travel plans if they want to go see it.
Also, like, if you're making it a Black Friday game for TV, like you're doing this purposefully, you have a time in mind. Like you know when you want this game to be. So just announce it. Help us help you guys.
Don't announce it on like this Sunday night or
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
It is announced in midweek. Would be great.
Perfect.
But I mean, a lot of news, right, Johnny? So we'll see what's lurking around the corner in the next day or two for James Franklin and his program. I'm sure there's going to be some recruiting news for the Penn State fans, but we now have the official. We don't. We have 2 starting times. We have one. We have one kind of move date. I think everyone thought that game was going to be on Saturday, the Michigan State game. So it's going to be on Friday. And it's gonna be a new experience, and it could be a good, nice scouting trip for us, Johnny, because the draft's gonna be there a couple of months later. We'll get our lay of the land, and then, you know, when Penn State probably has a couple guys in line to be 1st-round picks, we'll know exactly where to go in April because of partly because of this.
But to find all the Detroit dive bars, Bob, all of them.
Oh, I got a good one. I don't know. This is
I figured you do.
This kind of changes our plans because I don't know if it's going to be open on Thursday.
Yeah.
So
we'll see.
I don't know. All right, Penn State fans, we'll let you go, but a lot to get to. I think Dave Jones and I will be back later in the week, but who knows what's coming next for Penn State? And hopefully, sooner rather than later, we can talk a little bit about the starting time for the land grant trophy battle between Penn State and Sparty.